A reading from the Gospel of Luke. He looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for all of them have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, has put in all she had to live on." I've always loved this story in the Gospel of Luke, how Jesus notices this poor widow contributing out of her poverty into the treasury. The word says she put in 2 small copper coins. And Jesus knows that that was probably all she had to live on, and said that that was not only just as valuable as the rich people putting out of their abundance, which was noted, I'm sure, and needed, but this widow put in all she had to live on. And we know the widows were particularly vulnerable for not having husbands, and maybe she had a son or not who could contribute to her sustenance. But Jesus noted her devotion and her simplicity and her trust and faith to make such a contribution. What a wonderful story to illustrate the life of our saint for today, Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, also known as the Little Flower of Jesus, or simply the Little Flower. The Catholic Church declared her one of the 4 women doctors of the Church, up there with Hildegard of Bingen and Catherine of Siena, Saint Teresa of Avila, one of my personal favorites, and Thérèse of Lisieux, another favorite. They're all favorites, of course. Pope Pius X, I believe, canonized her and said that she was one of the greatest saints of all time, up there with Francis of Assisi. She had a vision of the infant Jesus at 14 years old and the Blessed Virgin Mary, his mother, and wanted to become a nun at 14. She came from a very pious, dedicated Catholic family. And each of their remaining daughters, all of them, became nuns. And at 14, her call was quite visceral. They said their family made their way to the Vatican to see Pope Leo, and she hurled herself at his feet, asking for permission to become a nun. He told her to follow the elders in her community. She wouldn't take no for an answer, clung to his feet, and he said yes. The story said she had to be carried away by guards. So she became a nun at 15 years old. I think that's quite fascinating. I believe God does call many of us as children, or drop a seed letting us know what the trajectory of our life may be. I strongly believe God calls children to whatever path they may take. I believe it does start early. It was so strong with Thérèse of Lisieux that she gave it her all. She died at the tender age of 24, but in those 9 short years, she had a tremendous life of service and devotion, and felt that her call was particularly one of prayer. She strongly prayed for the priests in her day, and she had a revelation of divine mercy and grace and God's love, which was very interesting at this time because Jansenism was real popular at this time in France, which touted that we had to work hard to be holy, the hardest we work, because God was judging each of us and all of us fell short. And at this time, she had a revelation of God's mercy and favor and grace and love, and commanded us to lean into that love. She wrote her story on souls, which after her death made her quite popular. She talked about the simple way of the soul and called herself the Little Flower. She knew of the spiritual athletes like the great Thérèse of Avila and John of the Cross. And she said, those are mighty trees. But she saw herself as a little flower. And she said that God sees the tall trees and also the little flowers in the forest. And in fact, she said, once God saw the little flower, once we reach our hands up, that God couldn't help but lift us up and pick us up higher than the tallest trees. I think that's a beautiful image. She tells us that God can reveal God's self in the simple things in life. We can learn from all things, but be attentive to those simple acts, those pearls of wisdom and God's revelation. We thank Thérèse of Lisieux for her little way, her dedication, and for her tenacity to follow the call that God had placed on her heart. Amen.